Religious cults employ a plethora of techniques to manipulate their members into submission. One of these manipulation techniques is repetition. When a cult member sits amidst other cult members and hears the same teachings over and over again, he is slowly conditioned to conform to the group thinking. Repetition can be direct, such as the auditing technique used by Scientology, or it can be a bit more subtle, like the weekly meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses. Watchtower, the corporation that directs the Jehovah's Witness organization, has become very skilled at using repetition to condition their members, and one of the main ways they do this is through the Watchtower study. And I could not find a better example of manipulation than the 2 articles that Jehovah's Witnesses around the world will study during the last 2 weeks of January 2023. Today, I will be taking you on a deep analysis of these articles, and you will find how the Watchtower organization manipulates its members by taking the place of God Himself. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for future updates. Thank you so much for your support. The first article we'll be covering is titled, "Let Nothing Separate You from Jehovah." The synopsis for the article reads, "To endure faithfully in these last days, we must continue to trust in Jehovah and His organization. The devil tries to use trials to break that trust." So right from the start, we see that the purpose of the article is to promote trust in God and His organization, the Watchtower. It also makes the bold claim that anything that undermines her trust in the organization actually comes from the devil. This is black and white thinking. You either belong to God or you belong to the devil, and Watchtower will use this dichotomy effectively throughout the article. Paragraph 1 states that Jehovah uses his organization to teach and protect us. Here Watchtower wants his members to become dependent on the organization by giving it almost human-like attributes. The organization is likened to a teacher and a guardian, not as a community of equals, but as a big brother protecting you from harm. Paragraph 2 equates trust in God with trust in the organization. The more we learn about God and trust in Him, the more we will trust in His organization. Now these 2 terms have become forever linked together. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot claim to trust God if you do not trust His organization. And if you trust in Watchtower, that shows you are trusting God. Notice how much manipulation Watchtower was able to fit in these 2 small paragraphs, and it only gets worse. Paragraph 3 claims that anyone who has faith in Jehovah will never abandon the organization. Walking out of their religion would amount to siding with the devil. Paragraph 5 again drives the point home that doubting the organization will lead an individual to separating themselves from God. The devil is mentioned again, instilling more fear in the reader. Paragraphs 6 and 7 encourage the reader to continue praying in the face of hardship and to never abandon their spiritual routine. A spiritual routine being cult speak for the repetitive rituals Watchtower imposes on its members, reading the Bible, praying, and preaching to others. In this instance, prayer is used as a thought-stopping technique. When an individual is having doubts about God, Watchtower wants them to pray their doubts away, a sort of self-hypnosis. Notice how in Shirley's experience, her prayers were not answered with tangible help from God, but rather, Shirley simply felt that Jehovah was answering her prayers. She was still poor. Nothing changed at all. She simply managed to pray her doubts away. Watchtower and other cults employ these thought-stopping techniques constantly. Members are not encouraged to address their doubts and get to the truth of things. Rather, they should renew their devotion to God and the organization no matter what. If you stick to your spiritual routine, you too will not allow hardships or doubts to separate you from Jehovah. Another technique that Watchtower loves to use is sowing distrust in the media. Jehovah's Witnesses may stumble across new reports or articles showing a fellow member arrested for a crime. We saw that in Pennsylvania a few weeks back. The district attorney convicted and arrested 4 Jehovah's Witnesses for their sexual abuse of children. Watchtower knows that such reports bring terrible press upon their brand, and might instill doubts upon their members. So what is their strategy? They want their members to distrust any negative report that appears in the media, no matter how factual it is. Negative reports are produced by Satan in order to drag JWs away from God. Watchtower then goes a step further and plays the persecution card by mentioning the story of Paul, who was imprisoned for his faith. Watchtower makes no distinction between a prisoner of conscience, like the Apostle Paul or the Jehovah's Witnesses of Russia, with convicted pedophiles. According to Watchtower, all of these are suffering persecution, and therefore, all of these deserve our support. This rhetoric is dangerous, but it allows Watchtower to prime its members into rejecting all negative reports they encounter before any doubts start growing in their minds. This further imprisoned members under Watchtower's thought bubble. Now, paragraph 13 brings out possible objections that Jehovah's Witnesses might encounter out in the real world. Watchtower treats all sincere criticism of their religion as ridicule, and therefore as persecution. It's another way of saying, if you encounter these objections by unbelievers, their intentions are bad. They only want to sow doubts in you and destroy your faith.
They may say, I like you as a person, but your religion is too strict and out of touch with reality. Some may criticize us for how we deal with disfellowshipped ones, saying, how can you call yourself a loving person? Comments like these can plant seeds of doubt in our mind.
Both of these are legitimate concerns that deserve further investigation. If a JW is hit with these questions, the individual might ponder on them and start to have doubts. But you know by now that religious cults hate doubts. So instead of encouraging their members to address these concerns and resolve their doubts with further research, Watchtower wants them to simply ignore the concerns. Out of sight, out of mind. Another thought-stopping technique.
Do not let ridicule cause you to question Jehovah's standards.
There's even some emotional manipulation thrown in.
Think back on your own experience. Have you not seen time and again that Jehovah's standards are right and that they benefit you? Be determined to support the organization that upholds those standards.
This is what we call a leading question. It's designed to lead the reader into a predetermined answer. The reader is encouraged to think back on the positive memories he might have with their involvement with the cult, but without leaving any room to remember all the negatives. Manipulation at its finest. The devil is Christianity's greatest ally. Claiming to know the mind of the devil is one of the most useful techniques that a cult can exercise, and Watchtower does this constantly. In paragraph 17, Watchtower claims to know the devil's wants and needs, without even quoting a single Bible text.
Satan wants us to believe that Jehovah abandons us during our hardships and that supporting Jehovah's organization will only make life more difficult for us. Satan wants us to feel intimidated when responsible brothers are slandered, persecuted, or imprisoned. And by means of ridicule, he wants to undermine our trust in Jehovah's standards and his organization.
These are tremendously bold claims, and they are to be accepted wholesale by the reader. This potent gaslighting puts the reader in an awful position where any healthy doubts they might have are actually the work of the devil. The reader cannot trust his own intuition or feelings or critical thinking with a roaring lion roaming around them at all times. I repeat, the devil is Watchtower's greatest tool. And once again, members are told to remain loyal to Jehovah and his organization.
Be resolved to reject Satan's lies and to remain loyal to Jehovah and his organization.
A Reddit user, which I'll credit here, made this word count of the article. Words like trust and loyalty are constantly repeated. Jehovah is mentioned 65 times, the organization 26 times, Satan 6 times, and Jesus 0 times. And this was only the first article, talking about outside pressures a cult member might face, but the next article addresses the inside pressures And it gets even more culty. Paragraph 1 claims that to remain loyal, one must see matters from Jehovah's perspective. We have seen that Watchtower knows the mind of the devil, apparently, but they also know the mind of God. Paragraph 3 paints another scenario that a JW might find themselves in, this time inside the congregation. When a member is hurt or treated unfairly by a fellow member, he might start to have doubts.
If a brother can act this way, is this really God's organization? That is exactly how Satan wants us to react.
Again, having doubts is playing into the devil's wishes, thought-stopping technique.
Such negative thinking could cause us to separate ourselves from Jehovah and his organization.
Being hurt when someone offends us is completely normal human behavior, but cults love to demonize normal emotions by assigning them as thought crime, the notion that one can sin against God or authority with their mere thoughts.
If you are mistreated, do not become embittered against Jehovah or wonder if he has abandoned you. Instead, meditate on how he is helping you to endure the trial. Additionally, when others mistreat you, try to cover over their imperfections with love.
Meditation, another form of thought stopping. Meditate your doubts away. Did someone offend you? Just get over it. Here, forgiveness is mandatory. Cults love to use discipline to keep their members in check. In the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, a member is disciplined when he or she commits a serious sin. Their congregation privileges are removed, and an announcement is made to all the congregation. So-and-so has been reproved. If the body of elders in a congregation dictates that the sinning member is not repentant enough, the member is disfellowshipped, that is, put on probation and not allowed to talk with other members of the congregation or even with their own family. This is a form of public humiliation meant to break down the individual and make him dependent on the group, since his obedience is the only thing that can lift the harsh restrictions placed upon them. So what Watchtower does is take this horrific mental abuse and paint it as a loving provision from God. Feeling resentment towards this discipline equals siding with the devil. The article cites the example of Fernando, an elder who was disciplined and lost his congregation privileges. We are told that Fernando regained his trust in Jehovah and the organization by intensifying his spiritual routine and by engaging in deep meditation. In other words, re-indoctrinating himself. We are even promised a future reward from God if we remain obedient to Watchtower. The abuser beats their fellow man into submission and then calls it an act of mercy. Watchtower has changed its policies multiple times in the past, sometimes altering completely an established doctrine. Organizational changes can also cause members to become disgruntled and develop doubts. Watchtower cites a Bible story about Korah, a priest who rebelled against the established authority of Moses and was murdered by God. The lesson is clear. Accept all the changes we make, because complaining against us is the same as rebelling against God. More supposed experiences were given, and this woman named Zaina reveals her strategy for remaining obedient. I quote, "I never allowed myself to doubt the organization or Jehovah's love." More thought stopping. Paragraph 15 adds some of the usual fear-mongering we're used to, warning about the end of the world. And paragraph 16, again, drives home the order to obey the organization. In this article, the organization is mentioned 16 times. Most of the times, they're paired with Jehovah. So these two short articles mentioned the organization a total of 42 times. In the mind of the cult member, these two terms become of equal importance and linked together, but in a type of subconscious way. If you ask a Jehovah's Witness, who's more important, God or the organization? Of course, they're gonna say God, but in their minds, subconsciously, the organization dictates God's will. You can't have one without the other. You cannot serve Jehovah without also following the organization. And when you obey the organization, you are obeying God Himself. This is how brainwashing is carried out. Slowly, week after week, in a group setting. This is why Watchtower has been so adamant in insisting their members return to in-person meetings, because indoctrination is much more effective when you're surrounded by people that are pressuring you to think the same way. And this thought control is happening with millions of people all around the world as we speak, not only in the Jehovah's Witness religion, but among hundreds of sects, coerced to remain obedient to a corporation which demands complete control over their lives. By learning how cults operate, we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from their influence. I will be releasing more videos on this topic in the future, so if you would like to see those, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Please let me know your thoughts about the topic in the comments below. I know this was a more serious discussion, guys, but it's good to also sit down and really analyze how these cults operate, I want to give a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for keeping the channel alive. Guys, your support means the world to me. It helps me keep making more videos and keeping a constant schedule for it. I want to give a special shout out to Lopmeyer on Patreon for his support. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. Again, I'll be drinking my next glass of scotch in your honor. Guys, have a wonderful day. We'll catch you next time, and stay away from the tower.